I think you enable the integration leader for the most success when you have them brought in as early as possible into the deal. And the reason for that is they get all the aspects of information, all the decisions that were made and why. They understand all the risks and the mitigations that are identified through diligence, right? They're part of some of the additional discovery opportunities that happen versus getting it secondhand. When you get information secondhand, there's always some opportunity that things slip through the cracks, right? Or some pieces get left out or forgotten. And inevitably, even with that, sometimes you have transitions of people that like leave the company, and then then you have a complete gap of what information may have been discovered or found through that process. And so I think the earlier you can bring an integration leader in, it's just you're setting yourself up for more. I think the probability of success is so much higher on execution.
I'm your host, Kisan Patel, CEO and founder of M&A Science. Joining me today is Naomi O'Brien. Naomi is the Senior Director, Head of M&A Integration at Honeywell. She's a seasoned integration leader and currently owns the integration strategy across all of Honeywell, which includes building a scalable integration practice in support of all acquisitions, divestitures, joint ventures. Prior to Honeywell, Naomi spent close to 10 years at Cisco in a variety of roles, which included successfully leading integrations and separations. Today, we're going to talk about how to modernize a process-based company. How are you doing today, Naomi?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I
mean, as you mentioned, I started my career at Cisco, my M&A career at Cisco, and I've led many integrations, small tech and talents, all the way up to my last one. There was a $4.5 billion acquisition. So lots of fun experiences, lots of failures along the way, lots of learning lessons. And what I found was that doing integrations become a real passion for me. No two deals have ever been the same. And I think just, the constant learning and evolution as we get through different deals, complex deals and the likes has just been so exciting. And since I joined Honeywell after Cisco, I've been working to build and create an integration practice here to help all of Honeywell's businesses just really have that thoughtful integration planning and execution on the forefront as they go to do transactions.
Great. Well, coming from Cisco to a more non-acquisitive company like Honeywell, what are the biggest changes you've had to make in your M&A process?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest things have just been lack of experience. There's a very different experience level in when you're doing a few transactions a year versus many. And I think having cross-functional folks that are dedicated to M&A, which is what we had at Cisco versus at Honeywell, makes a difference as well, because again, it adds to that experience level that you need for the consistency base, right, and the process, and less ramp up as you go through deal execution. So it's probably the biggest thing. I'd say, another thing is just difference in tool and management of how you go through integrations in the process. So, when I came to Honeywell, they were very much still using Excel, right, to manage their integration planning and how they did coordination across. And one of the first things we did was stand up a tool here, because I think just having that ability to see the cross-functional dependencies, see the issues and risks before you have to end up in a reactive mode is just so incredibly helpful.
What about anything else around process specifically? Because I know you mentioned adding in cross-functional folks. I know the traditional approach, a lot of people tend to create playbooks and have sort of large checklists. I know last year we interviewed Karen Ashley, and she talked through the transition at Cisco where they really shifted away from that sort of very, very bulk process oriented approach.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I mean, that is huge. I mean, when I came here, same, they had checklists, and checklists are so hard because it doesn't allow people to really think outside the box, right? And especially as you start to get into deals that are more complex, especially for a company that is doing this pivot from an industrial to a more software technology industrial, being able to have the flexibility to say, okay, well, what matters based on the deal rationale, and what are we trying to achieve successfully out of this? You can't do it on a checklist, because as you start to go through and you say, check, 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 I'm done, you've missed several things that are important and critical for the success of implementation or execution. And so really it's challenging, and it's pushing the team to say, okay, checklists can be guidances, think of them as frameworks. Think of them, and I tell people, think of them as like the bowling lane, that you have the bumpers, right? So that the ball doesn't go down into the gutter. You kind of think of checklists as that. It's like, okay, you have something to keep you from going into the gutter, but what are some of those additional things that we need to consider as we go through this process? Where do we really need to keep the pulse?
I like that. So I guess, so is there things that you changed even beyond that? Say you dial back that you have these sort of lists that at least give you some guidance. Anything else in terms of just the way the thinking or even the management approach? How do you go about getting teams organized and things of that sort?
Yeah, the biggest observation coming in was that all the functions were siloed, very, very siloed. And looking with their horse blinders on of what the things I need to do and I think one of the things we needed to do is just bring everybody together and say, okay, like let's get awareness across the functions as to what your negotiables and non-negotiables are, right? As you think about your integration planning and the considerations that you go through. Because a lot of it was that most of them weren't even aware of what each other was doing or what was important to the other teams, right? And granted, they had some dependencies that came across, but they didn't understand the critical factors that approach brought to it, right? So I think we needed to bring everybody together, go through what playbooks they did have, go through again what's negotiable, what's non-negotiable, and what I mean by that is, when we think of non-negotiables, cybersecurity, that's a non-negotiable. We're going to do our cybersecurity checks and the likes. What is negotiable, if you think about, network implementation, the timing for that, because you don't want to be disruptive as you go through the process. And at the same time, you don't want to overwhelm the target. And when you have a lot of siloed functions that are just kind of going in to do what they need to do, you don't have that comprehensive kind of plan to ensure that the day-to-day is being managed to help the target continue to do what they need to do, which is run their business. So, really having the functional leaders understand across the board, hey, this is what each other's doing. This is how you interwork with each other, and to define those negotiables and non-negotiables. That way they have an understanding of, how do we deconflict things? What's important? What's something that has more flexibility?
You're getting them to really come together, bring that approach together so they can connect the dots and what they're looking for and how that lands with the other functional lead and what they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
Was there
I
any
mean,
approach? Sorry, go ahead.
no, it's exactly right, because it was a gap that we identified when I first got here.
Was there any approach that you took in the way they communicated, structured meetings, anything around that was unique or had to be a big change?
Yeah, I mean, first thing was I set up a monthly functional sync, right? So this is just with the functional leaders, and to talk about, hey, here's some of the changes in approach. Here's some of the changes in process that we're doing across integration. Here are some things that, we're going to involve folks in as we try to bridge the gap between diligence and execution. So that was probably front end. Secondly, having the integration leaders more in tune with the integration teams, because most of our integration leaders here have no previous integration experience. And so making sure that they're on a weekly cadence with the functional teams that are doing the execution, so that they're staying on top of, okay, these are the activities we need to do over the next 30 days. And then at the end of 30 days, taking a retrospect look back to say, okay, did we accomplish everything in the last 30 days that we set out to do? And if not, what are some potential impacts going forward that we need to adjust for? As well as helping the team kind of switch their mindset in the next 30 days to say, hey, this is what's coming up. What do we need to do to prepare to ensure that we're set up for success, right? Where are the things that we need to kind of make sure we have to go run things forward, right? Or get approvals, or just make sure that we're all completely aligned.
We're gonna have a lot of fun talking about how to drive change. I want to make sure we got the areas that you did end up changing. You mentioned one was adding cross-functional folks. We talked about upgrading the tech stack, getting off of Excel. That's always a good start. And then the checklist. Did you make big adjustments? It sounds like you brought them, consolidated, reviewed them, and really made it clear that you had lists, but kept them more as guides. So people kind of knew areas to get into, but then they're still sort of doing their own thinking. And then you got the different functional leads together to really collaborate, understand what they're looking for, what are the non-negotiables, what are the negotiables, and then enabling that collaboration across the functional leads so they can better understand how their roles come in, what they're specifically looking for, enabled monthly syncs with those functional leads. And I like that you also added retrospectives to be able to look back and see what changes made an impact that were good, that could be adjusted, and continue to evolve from there. Was there anything else that I missed?
No, I think you hit it on the nail. I think what I want people to know is really just don't underestimate the level of communication, right? Because I think some people assume things that, oh, it's getting communicated or people are sharing it across, and it's not really happening. And so, I know people don't like to have a lot of meetings, and, people's calendars can get inundated with that. But when you're really trying to stand up a process and build a practice, change is hard, right? And to get that change, it takes a lot of two-way communication, right? It's not just a one-way push down, like it's got to be this way. It's a lot of feedback, right? It's a feedback loop to say, okay, well, what's working or what's worked in the past, and what hasn't worked, and the things that haven't worked, what could we tweak or how could we change those to make it better? Right. I mean, and I'm not saying perfect. I'll give you the tool as an example, right? Standing up the tool. I had a lot of pushback in the beginning about standing up an M&A tool. And, people would tell me, oh, but it's not perfect. And I said to them, sure. Yeah, let's look at the 70-30 or 80-20 rule, right? It's never going to be perfect. But at the same time, is it better? Ask yourself, is it better than what we had, right? Is it enabling people to be more successful? Is it allowing efficiencies where you didn't have them? And efficiencies in this case was, you had zero version control with Excel. But here, at least with a tool, it's real time. And that people can go in, all the functions can go in, they can update their statuses. You can see where things are at just quickly, visually. You know where the issues and risks lie. And I think there's a lot of value to be had there. And so really articulating how this helps and improves their lives, as well as listening and being able to say, okay, I get it. This is painful. Okay, what can we change to make this, just a little bit better, right? And I think that really goes a long way.
Yeah, I like the listen first approach. I mean, was that a big part when you got into the role, as you got to know the different people on your team, different functional leads? It was just sort of getting into a little bit about that, like, hey, what are you looking to improve and things like that?
Yeah. I was in a total observation mode for the first 30 to 60 days, really. I mean, I was riding along on the integrations that were already in flight, trying to understand how they approach things, getting a little bit of a historical perspective of how they got to where they were. And then just, again, having the conversations of, okay, well, what were your pain points, right? And hey, what do you think about this, right? And just leveraging some of my experience from the pain I've had on integrations that I've executed in the past to relay, just that thought expertise across to them. And I'll tell you, I mean, I think it came across very well. It was very valued. People respected my experience from before. And in turn, I think it got the thought process just running with everybody to where they started thinking like, wow, yeah, we could do this. And what about this? Right. And that's where you want to get to. You want to get to the point where people feel like they have some stake in the game, that they have some control and they can change things to make things better as well.
Listen first. Can we talk about how you train people for M&A? This is a challenge for a lot of practitioners where a lot of moving parts in M&A that touches pretty much every function, and you have folks that have never done M&A before. So how do you train people for M&A?
Yeah, it's interesting because as I came into the role, I quickly found out that the integration leaders had zero integration experience before they led these integrations. And don't get me wrong, very senior, very competent, capable folks, right? But again, there's something to be said about applicable experience versus conceptual, right? So it's very hard to teach somebody the conceptual of like, oh, well, when you encounter this in a deal, these are some things you can think about, versus you're living the deal, you're living the failures, you're running into the issues, right? And you're having to fight the fires real time. So one of the first things I did as I listened to some of the integrations of, integration leaders that were already in flight was I thought, okay, I need to create an integration leader startup program. So basically, what are some of the initial deliverables, the expectations that they need to have from a cadence perspective, just some consideration points as they go to approach certain situations and cycles of the deal. And then, I spent a good amount of time just hand-holding through the process, right? Because there's a lot of context that has to be applied through that, not just for the integration leaders, also for the functional leaders as well, or the functions. Because as we've seen, there's been a lot of turnover in markets and, roles and jobs. And so, people don't know what they don't know. And so helping to just identify contextually, okay, these are things you need to consider. These are things you need to think about. Hey, I've encountered something like this in the past. And, what do you think about doing this? And really trying to get them to think about it versus you telling them how to do it is probably the key on the coaching moments and the teaching moments. And I'll tell you, I have, the integration leaders have really just hit the ground running with it. We meet weekly. I do sit in on their weekly integration meetings just to make sure, hey, if there are things that they don't know or they can't answer, that I can jump in, right, and help provide that additional context. So yeah, I think that was the first start, is just really creating that startup training program for them, and then delivering the coaching aspect of it as they actually go to execute through the process.
How does that, do you deliver it? Do you have, because you mentioned Allocating called it the integration startup program. Is that a formal presentation that you walk through? Is it sort of workbook, things to reference? Like, what does that end up looking at like?
It's actually a Teams folder filled with documents that, I have a read me first document that kind of talks them through what each of the deliverables in that folder are and what they're used for and where in the cycle that they would use them. And then the other side of it is the coaching kind of aspect of it. They're going to meet with me, right? They're going to have a weekly cadence with me so that they can ask their questions, so that I can provide feedback or thoughts. But it's a Teams folder just really filled with different deliverables and documents that are we've typically been using as we go through front end and then deal execution post close.
Cool. That's a great, makes a lot of sense that you put that effort to build that out and get everybody up to speed. We talked about this already a little bit about the changes, but I guess in terms of getting people to really embrace the changes, is there anything that you sort of expel in that direction?
I think the biggest thing again is getting them to think for themselves, right? So getting people to really get excited for what they're doing and how do they make their lives easier, because when you can show somebody how it makes, their job less challenging. They're more willing to put in the time and effort for it. So, I think I've had many sessions, especially as I do the monthly functional syncs, to really talk about the pain points and the challenge. What are you guys seeing? And, one of the biggest things we found on that was some of the functions weren't as mature as the other functions. So, we started to have each of the functions share their playbooks across. And what we found was there were some extreme differences. You had some that were just really well thought out and put together, and you had others that were just less mature because there wasn't either a lot of activity in that space previously, or the experience levels were different. And they wanted to leverage what the other functions had used to just kind of really develop and build out some of their playbooks and processes. And I thought that was just great. I mean, the fact that they wanted to share and, help build, help each other out is just, it helps accelerate the process.
So you need good leadership. You have to empower the functional leads to take ownership of what's in their scope and what needs to be done.
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
Let's see here. How do you ensure integration success?
Wow. Yeah. I think prior to, the previous point I mentioned about the forward look and the backward look, we do a 30, 60, 90 before we close the deal of integration planning. So what are the things we want to accomplish in the first 30 days, the first 60 days, the first 90 days? And as we go through that process, we do ensure that it's critical integration activities, first of all, right? So it's not, boil the ocean. You don't want to have everything in there. What are the critical things that matter? What is it across all of the functions, and where are the cross-functional dependencies? And oh, by the way, how do these tie back to deal rationale, right? Because at the end of the day, we have to ensure that we're achieving the deal commitment that we set out to do. So, one of the ways we do is we look at this is from an integration scorecard perspective. We like to look at people, how we're doing across from people perspective, from a financial perspective, go to market, and technology. And so what I mean by people is, looking at it from, you have a hiring plan as an example that you need to execute in order to scale the business. How are you achieving that on a month-to-month basis, right? What are the things that you're doing to find these folks, right, for this business? Retention plans that you've put in place to ensure some critical skills don't leave, and then looking at attrition numbers. And when we look at technology, it's not just capabilities, it's also milestones, product insertion, those types of things that are enabling your technology forward. When I talk about go to market, it's the selling motion, it's the channel, it's your sales strategy. What are the things that you need to do? Do you have, cross selling across businesses that you need to make sure that you're able to do? And if so, do you have the proper incentives in place? And then finally, the financials is really just looking at, your typical financials of revenue, gross margin, synergies across, and how we're doing, and what do we need to do to achieve those. And so what I like to tell the team is, as they go through their integration planning for the 30, 60, 90 in particular, because that's when a bulk of the activities do happen, is can you tie it back to deal rationale? Can you tie it back to what we're trying to commit out of the deal?
Can we give some examples of what are some metrics? Because these are good. I like how this breaks things down into a much simpler way of looking at integration, gives you the cross-functional thinking around it. But do you have examples of what would specific success metrics be in those different categories?
Yeah, I mean, as an example on the people, the hiring plan, right? We actually have them break down by function needed for hiring and by month what the hiring plan needs to be. So in month one, so the first 30 days, you said you were going to hire 2 salespeople and a customer excellence person, and and whatever it is. And as you're going through the first 30 days, it's, hey, have you gotten candidates from recruiters? What part of the process are you at? Have interviews happened? Does it look like you're going to be successful in achieving that, so that those people are hitting the ground running from day 30 on, right? And so, so that's one example there. I'd say on the go to market from a selling motion perspective, sometimes, and we've had this experience even here at Honeywell, where there are expectations that some of the other Honeywell businesses, the ones that don't acquire, this company, are going to be expected to help sell, right? There's some sell synergies that are put in place into the model. And so what incentives do you have in place? Have the business leaders talked and agreed that, maybe 10% of their goal, of these salespeople's goals in this other business, is to sell this, this acquisition product or this capability or technology. And then how do you measure that? So do they need a training program in place? What are the things that have to be set up so that they're set up for success, right? And so that we can ensure that we have the leading indicators to understand whether it's going to be off the rails. Because if it's going to go off the rails, you want to get ahead of it, right? You don't want to be reactive. You want to have the mitigation plans ready to go and in place.
What about the financial?
Yeah, I mean, financials, that one's always a tough one. I think depending on the type of deal you're doing. So one of the things we're learning is that sometimes when we're doing these more software technology ones, we can't have these very aggressive out the gate revenue targets, right? We really need to understand how they have achieved the success that they've achieved and what are some of the selling practices and selling motions they currently have in place to do that in order for us to scale it to said model or deal commitment that we're trying to do. So those are ones where, we're obviously tracking, like, what's the forecast, what are the bookings, what's the time from order to bookings to revenue, looking at all of those factors in order to, again, understand what the leading indicators are. Leading indicators, I think, are probably one of the bigger things that we've had to put some focus on lately is how can you tell before it happens, right? How can you get a sense of whether things are doing what, as well as you think they are, or whether it's something that, gosh, we really need to start pivoting and thinking about how we're going to mitigate this.
You got an example of that where you sort of come across something as that lead indicator and take some swift action to course correct?
I mean, the people one's probably the biggest one, right? So when you look at the hiring aspect, when you say, hey, in order for us to achieve sales in month 2, we're going to have these 2 salespeople, right? And if you don't have those 2 salespeople identified and brought up to speed, because think about it, anytime you hire somebody new, there's a ramp up process, right? You've got to ramp them up. If they're not familiar with the business and they're not familiar with the company, those 2 are some, critical factors that you've got to, put the time in for. And so if you start to get down the path of, you're at the end of your 30 days and maybe you had some candidates, but not really identified what you want, then you're going to miss already, right? That's the leading indicator. Don't have the person in place to go off and execute. So what does that mean? What's the impact then? So you have to start thinking of impacts to your plan and what you thought you were going to do between days 30 and 60. And how are you going to course correct further on down the road? Because it doesn't mean it's a free pass. Just because you missed that first one doesn't mean, we don't have to achieve what we said we were going to do in 30 to 60. It just means, okay, now you have to figure out how you're going to accelerate that makeup of what you were going to do in 30 to 60 over, let's say, 60 to 90.
That's cool. I like how they use that example, essentially using these metrics to sort of, and to give them as leads to know when you got to take action. We didn't cover technology. Do you have any interesting examples around technology?
Yeah, even on the technology front, when we have capabilities, and I'll give you an example, you acquire a company and you think, okay, this is such a great capability and we want to roll this out, and and they tell you, yes, this is an enterprise level solution. It's going to be great. And what you come to find out is enterprise level solution may have a different definition for a small company than a large company, like the size of Honeywell. And so, semantics are a lot, right? It's like you go to roll out what you think is an enterprise level solution and it's not really to that level, right? So then you have to take a step back and say, okay, what do we need to do to make this an enterprise level? We have to offer some additional capabilities. We have to put in some additional feature sets. And that takes time, right? And so those kinds of things where, as a leading indicator, this is our definition or our threshold for an enterprise level capability or solution. these are the things we need to do to get there. These are the stepping stones, or these are the numbers of features or the quality and quantity of things that a company would buy thinking of that enterprise level solution. So again, I think that's one way you look at it is, okay, what would we need to roll out? And if it's a multitude of things, okay, what's the timeline for that? Are we on track based on those milestones, right? And if not, again, it's the impact, forward looking, backward looking. You're not going to get a free pass. So what do we have to do to accelerate? Do you need to bring in a couple more people, right, to help enhance that, or to get back on track onto the speed that you need to do to actually get this orderable?
And do you keep statuses on these metrics? Is it green? I see green, yellow, red, or what does that look like?
We do. We do. So I have a monthly integration scorecard that I send up to our CEO every single month. And that scorecard is at a high level summary. There's the people, the technology, go to market, and the financials, and it's done with a green, yellow, red. Red meaning it's not recoverable. It's, they've got to get onto a recovery plan, a get well plan of some sort. Again, not a free pass, but it just means that they're not going to be recoverable for the year of what we set out to achieve. Yellow meaning it's off the rails a bit, but it is recoverable, right? So they have a plan in place of how they can accelerate or modify things that they need to do to get back on track. And green means they've hit the nail on everything and everything is rosy and looking great. So that's the high level. In addition to that high level summary, I also have each of the active integrations have a one pager that kind of gives more into the KPI and the leading indicators associated with each of those four major areas. So if they want to provide a little more detail on the financials about, revenue impacts, as an example, with supply chain issues these days, a lot of folks are highlighting the fact of how, there's potential impact on their ability for, to achieve customer deliverables. And the same with people, right? With the great resignation in place, you see a lot of retention and attrition, aspects that aren't looking green as well. And so they've got to have those mitigation plans. So the one pager allows them to provide a little bit more commentary associated with each of those, as well as showcasing how they're performing relative to the financials based on the plan.
There's no way for anybody to hide from you.
There's nowhere to go.
No, they got to report up. Can we go to when you start thinking about these metrics and how do you approach that?
Yeah. So these are definitely all agreed to before we commit to do the deal, right? So there's an alignment with the executive sponsors and with our executive leadership team on, what success looks like with respect to those numbers, obviously what's baked into the deal model. And then they also have to highlight the integration plan and execution, business execution, as to how they're going to achieve those. So that's all done before we can move forward to commit to the deal. And not to say it's perfect, right? I mean, there's obviously opportunity to tweak it a little bit, but the variance level is not going to be much from that, right? They've got to have it pretty fairly detailed at that point.
Okay, so it does come up really early. Who's involved?
The executive sponsor, the GM of the business, typically, the integration leader when we can bring them in early. So that's always my challenge as well, is trying to get an integration leader pulled in as early as possible. Myself, our deal team, our corporate development team. And that's typically where we kind of caucus across each other, and some of the functional leaders as well. So when you have some of the higher, more mainstream functions like HR and finance and IT, they're typically also included in those conversations as well.
Why is it so hard to get why is it so hard to get an integration lead in early?
Yeah, it's interesting. The model, again, when you don't have a dedicated integration team, so to speak. So as an example, at Cisco, there were dedicated integration leaders. That's all they did, right? Is, 2 to 3 deals at a time on their plates. They would churn through, all the acquisitions that Cisco did. Honeywell doesn't really have that model. Honeywell is more of, as the probability of the deal is higher that it's going to happen, then we're going to go pull somebody from their day job to lead the integration. And so while we can try and get folks in, at the diligence level, at least on the periphery, double hatted from their current job and the potential new opportunity that they're going to do, it's not always the case. So sometimes it gets a little bit further after diligence that we're able to do that. And typically I become the bridge for that. So I sit through all the diligences and identify integration considerations and then bridge that gap of knowledge with whichever person gets designated as the integration lead for the effort.
That's true. Like large organization or large M&A function would have those dedicated resources. So it's easier for them to say, I'm going to put you up early in the process, get involved. But then most organizations that are doing one to a few deals a year, they don't do that. It's a shared resource. They pull somebody from a business, so they're not likely to pull them in until there's that high certainty that the deal is going through. What value or difference do you see between the two? Or I feel like you'd have some good insight in what's that specific value of having this integration lead, because this comes up quite often when you work with different organizations. It's sort of the fundamental principle there is start the integration, think as early as possible.
Oh, it's a night and day difference. In an ideal world, I would have a bench of integration leaders, right? Because I think the model that Cisco has is absolutely spot on. I think you enable the integration leader for the most success when you have them brought in as early as possible into the deal. And the reason for that is they get all the aspects of information, all the decisions that were made and why. They understand all the risks and the mitigations that are identified through diligence, right? They're part of some of the additional discovery opportunities that happen versus getting it secondhand. When you get information secondhand, there's always some opportunity that things slip through the cracks, right? Or some pieces get left out or forgotten. And inevitably, even with that, sometimes you have transitions of people that leave the company, and then then you have a complete gap of what information may have been discovered or, found through that process. And so I think the earlier you can bring an integration leader in, it's just, you're setting yourself up for more. I think the probability of success is so much higher on execution.
Thanks for clarifying that for our industry practitioners listening. What happens when you get 3 of those metric areas right and miss on one other one?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the deal. I think given what's going on in the environment today with the great resignation and supply chain issues, you can have a variety of challenges. As an example, on a deal, you could have where people and go to market are more important factors, because that without those, your ability to hit the technology and the financial metrics are going to be a miss, right? So, it really just depends on what the deal commitment factors are, what you're trying to achieve. I think of it as when you think of the 4 things, you have a box. And the box doesn't necessarily have to be equal, right? You can have a box with different sized sides, but at the same time, it's which sides do you need to execute the others? And so thinking about it from that perspective, again, in my example being the people in the go-to-market to achieve technology and financials. If you don't have the people, you're not going to be, you're not going to have the skill sets to achieve the capabilities. And without that go-to-market channel and sales strategy in motion, you're not going to achieve your financials either, right? So really trying to think about which ones are more relevant for your current situation. And it'll change deal to deal.
So there's not one that just stands out to you as the most important?
I mean, I'd say, if you ask Honeywell, it's probably revenue, financials, right? They want to make sure that we're achieving the financials. That's probably the number one marker. If that's red, you got a problem. But I think for me, just given what's going on in the market, we're seeing a lot of turnover, a lot of change in roles and people. And that can be problematic if you acquire a company for a specific skill set, right? A skill set that may be more challenging to backfill. So that's always, again, it just really depends on the acquisition, but there are going to be different factors that are going to cause you to take a pause and say that's critical, right? We can't afford any impact in that space.
Yeah, it's huge. I just heard about integration. It's already hitting over 17% attrition. So it definitely is a big thing.
It's not unusual in today's space.
Yeah, it's definitely a different environment. So to summarize, it varies. It varies, and it varies almost to who's involved with what part of the deal, but it also changes based on the deal and what those value drivers are as that fluctuates deal to deal. When we look at like when things start getting into the red, what happens to the integration leader if they have some of these items that sort of tagged or flagged red? How do they get them out?
Yeah.
Or what's the response?
Well, my experience is nothing just necessarily goes from green to red, right? So there's always a transition, and you're always going to you should be at least be able to see the indicators, or see the train wreck before it happens, so to speak. And so if you have an integration leader that's in tune with what the plan is, where they should be and where they're not, then you can raise the flag early. And what we like to say at Honeywell is, we want to have what we call a transparent operating system. Let's just say it that way, where if something is not going well, don't wait, right, until it's completely on fire before you raise the flag and say, hey, I need help. It's reaching out proactively. So, hey, this is either an issue area or an area I'm keeping a focus on because I have a sense that it's not going 100% to plan. And, or, hey, I need some help here because I'm not sure how to navigate this given the situation or the circumstances. And I'll give you an example. When we acquired a company, we had conversations and alignments with the target leaders that we were going to transition some of the financial responsibilities from their leader, right, quickly upon close, so that they could focus on the commercial aspects of the business. And what we found was, and again, this is coming down to the hiring plan, right? You have to hire a financial person to go and then take over those financial responsibilities so that this person can go do the commercial day job. And not necessarily a simple task, so to speak, right? Especially when you're talking about this smaller business. So it gets down to a point where it's like, okay, well, we maybe have identified somebody, but we're not on the time track because we said we would do it in the first 30 days. We're now at day 20. The person we identified, maybe we can get them onboarded by day 30, but then they still have the ramp up, and this leader wants to go on vacation because, he's been working hard on the team. So there's a whole slew of things, right? That it's like, hey, just raise the flag so we can say, okay, what interim things can we put in place? Can we have some folks that are sitting in there kind of getting that day-to-day insight into how they're doing their financial processes, right? So that when this person comes on board, it's a different transition versus, it's too late or we're behind the bar and then this leader's upset, right? So different situations, different things. It's more about how do you ask for help? How do you bring in other people and folks that can help in the process?
Is there a mechanical approach of doing that, or is it more about communicating, getting everyone comfortable to speak up early, or having meetings where you
Well, the
prompt people to
mechanical
do that?
approach is the tool. It's the tool, certainly, right? Because
Start
you're going to
flagging things
see
as right priorities. Yeah.
You're going to see if something's delayed in the tool, right? You're going to see something that, should have been done. And there's going to be notes associated with it to say, okay, yeah, well, we identified folks, but the person's not going to be on board, right? So anybody looking at that can go through the tool and say, okay, wow, this one's looking like it's going to be potentially behind. And what do we need to do there? But at the same time, I also put the responsibility on the integration leader to flag some of those items. We have a weekly kind of roll up report that they send up of, hey, here's a summary of the week of how things are going. Right. And oh, by the way, here's some, let's call them focus areas, because when you start calling things issues, or, then people start thinking their hair's on fire. But let's talk about the focus areas, right, of where we potentially need some support and help.
Since most of the people that you mentioned were inexperienced, how do you select an integration leader?
Yeah, I really encourage the business leaders to identify folks that have the ability to navigate the company cross-functionally, right? So it's not ideal to have somebody who's fairly new to the company, right? Who doesn't know who to reach out to. And because, as you know, it's a very quick, you got to get quick responses and quick reactions in there. So that's probably the first. The second part of it is, do they have any understanding of the business, right? Because I think there's some ability to leverage that business expertise and that understanding of how they need to be successful to operate. So that is also helpful. And then the third thing is really, finding folks that have dealt with complex program management, because inevitably, I don't think I've ever seen an integration plan go 100% to plan ever. And so, you have to be able to navigate those complex waters of like, okay, that's going to be an issue, or that's on fire. And at the same time, I got to go deal with this over here, and the stakeholder management and the communication up, down, sideways. Right. So having those as probably my three biggest factors of considerations is what we look for. And then I obviously help kind of look at profiles to give them some sense of, okay, if you're going to bring me these 6 profiles, I think these 3 are probably best suited just based on their previous experience. And then the next step from there is I usually, if they offer up 2 as an example, I'll talk to both of them just to kind of get a level set the expectations, get a sense of what they think the job is versus what it actually is, and whether there's still a desire to do that going forward.
I want to hear how you do that. How do you level set what M&A integration is?
Well, it's deal time, right? You're depending on the deal. If it's global, you're working around the clock. You're dealing with different, cultural, company factors, global factors. You're dealing, and I tell them, you don't have to be an expert in all of these functional aspects. That's what you have the functional teams for. But you still have to have a pulse. You have to have a sense of like when you need to go reach out to people to get support and help, right? Where you want to put your silver bullets, right? For anything that may be not going the way you want it to go. And then just being able to influence folks as well, right? Because inevitably, you're going to have to create this comprehensive change management plan, and not everybody's going to want to be aligned, because people are going to have their horse blinders on, and they're going to say, well, this is what I have to do, and I have to do it by this time frame. And you have to be able to articulate to them that, hey, if you do it like that and you don't take the rest of this into consideration, it's going to impact X, Y, Z, right? And we're all not going to be successful. So really having a leader that's able to just get into the trenches, like, and I say work around the clock, but it really is. And, the first typically 90 plus days, right? And then it kind of smooths out from there. So it's a real big ramp. And then it kind of, as things get under control and things start to go into their own motion, gets easier.
So you're pretty candid about it. You don't quite scare them off. You just give them a good heads up of what's coming.
You want to be real, right? Because you don't want them to come in and be like, oh, this is a bait and switch. Like, I thought this was going to be my cushy stepping stone to a GM role.
What's the biggest challenge that you're seeing today?
Great resignation, lots of turnover. And what happens with that is that people take their inherent knowledge with them, right? And so when you think about M&A process and integration processes and how you go to execute them, a lot of what it is up here, right? When you've done several deals, you know what you would do the next time, right? You have your best practice, you have your lessons learned, you have your battle scars from doing, previous deals. And when people leave, it's hard to, in maybe 2 weeks, transition that amount of knowledge off to somebody else. So, because of that, one of the other things that I've started doing at Honeywell is creating a single source of truth, right? When I came in, it was like, oh, we have diligence files in a Teams folder, and we have a deal model in a shared network drive, and we've got integration plan in Excel. And it was like, how does anybody keep this stuff straight, right? How do you know where, like, you really have to take a minute to think, okay, where do I need to go to find this piece of information? And instead, what we've started to do is leveraging the tool. We're putting, using the virtual data room space in there for all the diligence stuff. We're putting all of our integration planning in the tool as well. We're, putting the deal modeling and stuff in there as well, because it's got a document repository. And that way it's it's a true single source of truth. And then, the same with the integration planning for the functions, because as the functions put their plans in there, if somebody leaves, you don't have to scramble to figure out, like, gosh, well, what did they do and what was accomplished and what is left to do? You have it all spelled out, and you have exactly the status of what was accomplished.
That's helpful. You're right. The big challenge right now is retaining people. Is there anything specifically you're doing to mitigate that risk?
Yeah, I wish I had the magic keys on that one. I think it's just market right now. That's a hard one.
Make every role remote and.
I mean, that certainly helps, right? I mean, the ability for people to, it's probably top of mind for a lot of people because they've become accustomed to it over the last couple of years.
Oh, I've noticed that. I've seen about well over 80% of the interviews I've been participating in I'm not going back to the office.
Yeah.
I got some questions here. Do you have a hard stop on that word, by the way?
No.
Okay. I'm going to try to tackle these. I got my colleagues are next, so I can steal a little bit of their time. But there's some good questions here. So one, I have, how do you allocate the right level of accountability between the deal team, the GM, the functional leads, and make sure everyone is pulling their weight?
Yeah, you have to really create the process up front where you say, okay, here are the deliverables we're going to do as we do, deal execution, like diligence, who's responsible, diligence readouts, right? Commit briefings and such. And you have to really hone in on, okay, who's responsible, right? Who's accountable for it? So kind of doing a RACI based on, the deliverables you expect to achieve. And then having regular meetings with them just to make sure you're aligned and you're getting to the level of deliverables that you expect. And certainly we're not perfect at that either. And it's something we're constantly evolving. But it definitely helps to start off with a type of RACI to kind of do that.
That makes total sense. I have, how's value being translated to Honeywell's current clients once an acquisition has been made? Is that handled by the integration team?
I don't know that I would say that. I think there's a good level of communication that happens with usually the leaders of the business, the GM level, to talk to, especially the larger clients, just to really help them understand the strategy and the vision that we're trying to do. And again, articulate the value that this provides for them. Sometimes even talking about the roadmap certainly helps, but that's not at an integration level. Usually that's typically more done at the business level.
People want to know about the people. How's the employment environment impacting integration? Are people more or less flexible because of the impacts of the great resignation?
Yeah, I don't know that we've changed our thought process on flexibility there. Certainly probably should take a look at that, but we're seeing the impact. I mean, at the end of the day, I know everybody is, right, across the market, especially, M&A today it's growing, right? The number of transactions, the number of companies that are wanting to do that. So the people are pulling people left and right, out of each other's companies. So yeah, we're seeing the impact as well on our side. I can't say that we're changing from a flexibility perspective on that so much, and who knows what'll come in the future. I mean, I think certainly everybody's going to have to think about what they're going to be able to do to retain those folks better.
That's such an interesting dilemma. Everybody got comfortable in their working for their recliner at home.
Yeah.
How do you deal with a seller that became difficult to deal with during the implementation phase?
Oh, we have got lots of stories of those, so sometimes you have earnouts, which is, one way to deal with that, because it should motivate them a little bit more to accomplish, the commitments that were set in the deal model. Other times it's you got to play the game with them. You got to go through the hand holding and the coaching, have the empathy, right? And go through the process of, okay, what's the problem? What's the issue? I think having leadership alignment early on is usually more beneficial in the long run from an implementation execution perspective. And what I mean by that is starting to bring them in on what the vision is of integration, not necessarily what the metrics associated are, because obviously you don't want to do that until after you close, at least from a revenue financial perspective. But having the alignment of what you think it looks like, so that you can get a sense from them as to whether they think that allows them to be successful or not, right? Because the alternative is you have a one-sided plan. And when you have a one-sided plan, inevitably you find through execution that's your assumptions are not 100% correct, right? And then they feel that they've been set up for failure.
Another question just came in. Does Naomi's IMO establish a steering committee? If so, who gets to be on the committee?
Yeah, so our steering committee, for all intents and purposes, is really our executive leadership team. We have what we call as a corporate deal review board that we hold as a standing meeting twice a month. It allows us to bring different issues and opportunities to it as needed. That includes our CFO, our general counsel, the business leaders, obviously the business presidents and the GM of the business. Typically the integration leaders involved in that as well. And then they have some functional leaders, just depending on what the topic or conversation is. So yeah, either bring in the HR functional leader or, IT or the likes. But it's a standing meeting so that when issues arise where you need kind of that steering committee guidance and oversight or structure. So as an example, when things aren't necessarily on the rails is more a typical instance of when we need to have those sessions. They bring forward what they call, their plan or get well plan or whatever it is that they want to move forward with, or the recommendations. And that team will either bless it or challenge it, right? And pressure test what, some of the things that they're proposing to move forward with are. And then until we get to a particular, there may be follow-up required from those sessions as well. But that's typically how our steering committees tend to work.
They're kind of like the police.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're
the ones that, are really keeping the pulse.
Does your team also run the processes on partnerships or minority investments? If so, are there any differences to highlight in your approach there?
No, I mean, not mine in particular. So I think that's probably more done on the deal commercial side.
Okay. I have more questions. I've never seen, I heard that I've never seen an integration plan go 100% to plan. What's the industry average, in your opinion, of plans that actually are planned well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the industry average is on that. And I think it really depends, again, on the level of understanding of integration brought in on the forefront. Because in my experience, I've seen integration is typically an afterthought. And it's heartbreaking, honestly, because then you will find yourself, almost rest assured, in a recovery plan, get well plan situation if you don't bring integration in early enough. The more thoughtful, the more time that you have to put together an integration plan so that you can pressure test everything, so that you can actually visualize how you're going to execute it over a period of time. And I'm talking small chunks, right? This is why we do a 30, 60, 90 approach. Certainly there are things that don't happen until 12 to 18 months. But when you look at what are the critical things that have to happen in the first 90 days, and you start with day one, right? Day one, and then what's in the first 30 days, 60, and then 90, you have a better ability to kind of control your destiny on that and see what the impacts are. And without that, I think you set yourself up for failure. And certainly even with a 30, 60, 90, not everything's going to happen accordingly, because you're going to find that once you close, there are skeletons in every closet, right? You're going to find where the bones are, bodies are buried and whatever else. And you're going to have to deal with that. But ideally, as you've gone through the process, the planning process, you've had some considerations on those, and you have some mitigation plans in place so that when you encounter them, you're not 100% reactive. It's like, oh, we thought about that. We thought that could potentially happen. And here's what we're going to do to pivot.
Has ESG changed your playbooks?
I mean, I don't know if it's changed our playbook, so to speak, or if it's changed more of our assessment of deals, maybe is a better way to look at it, right? Looking at our ESG portfolio and understanding, if we go after something, how does that impact, or how does that help and enhance the ESG strategy?
That's a whole talk track of its own.
It really is. It's like the new buzzword.
It is, and it's interesting. It's very interesting. I like reading some of the press releases that really have their ESG spin into the positive favor of why this M&A deal needs to happen. Yeah. All right, you guys gotta stop asking questions after this. I got a few more here. On your team, how do you look for the talent of integration practitioners who will have a long career in this field, and how do you have a conversation with those who are not cut out for the role?
Yeah. So I will tell you, I've already started having these conversations because, again, at Honeywell, it's kind of a one and done kind of role. It's they typically do one and they move on. And what I've started to do is talk to the ones that are coming to the end of their roles about, hey, what about doing another one? And hey, maybe you had a smaller deal. Think about, you try to make it sexy, right? You say, hey, what about doing a large complex integration that has these global, aspects to it, where, maybe you're dealing with 8 different locations or countries and all these, complex, technical aspects or whatever, or product complexities. And it starts to get a little more exciting, right? And so starting to have those conversations gives people a different maybe impression or understanding or perspective, because when they're just doing these small deals that are maybe one location in the US, they're very simple, it's not something top of mind for them to say, oh yeah, I want to go do another one of these, right? But if you start to give them the like, oh, this is all the stuff that you could learn, and these are all the aspects that you'll get out of it, they start to, like, the light bulb goes off and it's like, yeah, that does sound kind of cool. The other conversation, not so fun, right? You have to really, I think you just have to be honest with people and say, look, you want to set yourself up for success, right? And it's these coaching moments, right? If you had a lot of coaching moments along the way and people just aren't getting it, then you have to just be honest, and you have to say, like, let's just be honest with us, right? Like, this maybe isn't the right field for you, or maybe, and the alternative is maybe they need to do something smaller. Maybe you've given them something that's too much for them to chew, right? And they need to start off with something that allows them to really progress better in a pace that is more aligned with how they can operate. So I'd say honesty is the best aspect on relaying to somebody that they're not really cut out for it, or maybe they need to take a different path.
I can tell you fired a lot of people before.
It's not, I'm not saying it's an easy conversation. It's not, certainly. And I've come across my share of people who probably shouldn't be doing it. But at the same time, you can't have that person kind of failing and struggling, constantly through it. Right. And I don't think they want to either. So, helping them realize, or maybe actually see that, is probably a better way to help them kind of maybe naturally exit than not.
Absolutely. That sounds fair. I see more people that shouldn't be in M&A on the front end of the deal as opposed to the back end. We won't go there. Naomi, what's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
Oh gosh, and some of you may have heard me talk about this before, but my last acquisition at Cisco that I led the integration for was the $4.5 billion acquisition of Acacia Communications, and that one had probably the longest time between announce and close of 601 days. So as you can imagine, 601 days is a long period of time, especially when you're acquiring a public company where, the employees have no idea whether they have a job. They have no idea what's going on really, because, there's a lot of hesitancy to kind of move forward with a lot of integration planning and such. And so trying to keep, the employees just kind of jazzed about it and moving forward and making sure, that things progress. But yeah, 601 days due to China regulatory approval. That's probably the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Wow. That's like a year and 2/3 of another year. It's a long
It's a
time.
long time.
Do the terms change?
They did.
Yeah, because you'd have to keep renegotiating the deal.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
the better? For the better or for the worse?
Depends on whose side you were on.
Fair enough. Yes, that's a record. I've never heard of that long of a period. Naomi, thank you so much for joining me today. I enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And here's to the deal.